This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
My name is Akshita Tripathi. I'm a performance manager at Thrive.
My name is Mark Foley. I'm a performance strategist at Thrive.
I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchette. Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of The Hypothesis. On the show today, we've got two fresh new guests with us here to tackle a fun and inflammatory question or hypothesis of the day, which is if meta ads don't work for you, it's your fault. So question one is, what are some things that marketers get wrong about meta ads? Let's talk common blunders.
Just kind of working on meta for the last couple of years and going to some of the conferences, I think the future of meta is the ability to kind of push all sorts of creative. The complication, though, with that is Meta's creative capabilities right now are not up to par to what clients need. And what I'm kind of referencing to is more so when it comes to their ability to leverage automation and AI. So that kind of makes a really tricky situation for how to leverage creative. I think the common blunder is to really make sure that your creative testing campaigns aren't a strategy that you're kind of neglecting and not revisiting. It's to make sure that your creative testing campaigns are set up in a way that are going to provide you the most amount of learnings. And I guess also to not go off of creative learnings that you might have gathered last quarter and then not revisiting your strategy with testing new sorts of hypotheses or new formats. I think that definitely is a big sort of untouched territory in terms of ensuring that, like, are you testing into every single format? Are you sort of answering to every different user that interacts with ads in different ways? And just because your ad might not see the most amount of results from like conversion standpoint, does that actually measure into it being a successful creative? Because what if a user does convert through something like a video experience and then later on goes to your website versus like going through your website initially while like watching the video creative?
I guess to like dig a little deeper on that, when you say that the advantage of Meta, or like what makes it a superior platform, is the creative options, do you mean because of like shorts and video formats, or like what makes the creative on Meta so much better than other ad platforms?
I think it's probably the amount of real estate that it offers on so many different platforms, because Meta is not just Facebook anymore. It's Instagram, it's also WhatsApp, and then they have other placements like search results and right column. I do feel like the real estate that you do get from Meta on creative is a lot larger than what some of the other platforms are able to offer. Obviously, it's a different kind of experience on a couple of different platforms, but for social especially, I think Meta's like advantage is that.
Probably the age demographics too, right? Like it probably spans a really large like demographic reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Mark, are there any blunders that you've seen that you feel like are appropriate here?
Yeah, from my own perspective and what I've been seeing a lot, particularly in the last 16 months, I suppose, breaks down to three items. That would be, I suppose, the misuse of campaign objectives, the actual creative itself, and how we're attributing meta performance. It's interesting debates to have it all three, because I know on some of these other podcasts it's even come up and we discussed about the campaign objectives, and basically Meta will do exactly what you tell it to do. So if you tell it to get you traffic, Meta will go out and get you a lot of traffic. If you tell it to get you a lot of add to carts, it will just fill you up with add to carts. But it's measuring and attributing out that traffic correctly, and that correctly towards your own clients' needs at the end of the day, because we can all optimize towards bottom of funnel, and that's quite easy. But when you're separating out your campaign objectives, what I'm trying to say, the platform is really good at that, but we're not really good at validating it, or some clients aren't certainly good at validating it. So we need to attribute correctly, because in this powerful world of AI where you just have to hand over the keys to Meta, it's a scary place to be when you're solely relying on what they're stating. So I know we'll get into this a little bit later on, but even stuff like search lifts, integrating third-party platforms, conversion lift studies to back reference what you're seeing, not just in your platform, but into your CRM as well. I know in terms of creative, Akshita touched on creative, but the big thing for me with creative I see with clients is an over-reliance on a certain type or a certain theme, not really moving away from that. Like at the end of the day, you are not your ideal target market 90% of the time. So creating that exact creative and that, like having a subjective preference rather than a data analytical one is really, really damaging your strategy.
I want to like take a highlighter over that multiple times, right? Like
Yeah.
it's so easy when you get in a room of people who are, just like you. And we see it all the time on the creative side, right? Where we're designing an ad and it's like, well, we don't like it. It's like, okay, but are you your demographic?
Exactly. And having that discussion. And well, this is what's worked for us in the past, but sometimes the data speaks and you need to iterate on top performers and iterate into new sectors. And yeah, an over reliance on the same theme and the same type as what worked before has damaging effects.
It's interesting because Maddie a couple episodes ago was talking about how I think her exact quote was a good marketer is a distrustful one. And I feel like that's so true in large platforms like Meta because they know they are the biggest, toughest kid in town. So I'd be curious if there are any areas that you both think are maybe somewhere where folks typically get maybe not sold a false picture, but are there any particular areas within reporting or like campaign building that you think people should really watch out for?
I definitely feel like reporting is probably the first one, just based on my experience, because there's always discrepancies, and there always will be discrepancies between what you're seeing in platform data through a third-party platform like Meta versus maybe what you have internally. And my sort of advice there would be to consistently validate that, kind of going back to being a little bit distrustful with the results that you're seeing on a platform like that. The best way to really do it is to like consistently approach lift testing and try and see if the incrementality that's being reported through meta testing aligns anywhere with like the level of incrementality that you're seeing on your internal reporting. And if it is there anything that you could apply to how you're factoring in those results? Like I know previously we, for one of our clients, took our lift test results and kind of factor that into multiplier that we use to kind of measure the level of incrementality that we're pushing through and getting from Meta.
Cool.
Not validating that whole hypothesis has led to a lot of interesting conversations I've had with clients recently as well, doing conversion lift studies, where clients who obviously rely on us to execute and implement their strategies, but they pop into the reporting from time to time and they see really strong metrics, particularly with these new AI campaigns that rely on what's called view through conversions. So it's basically it's over attributing to themselves and they're patting themselves on the back. But it's clients really rely on this and believe they should move more of their budget, substantially more of their budget, towards these AI campaigns, what it's called Advantage Plus, and away from other channels which we know do well, like typically like your Google, your bottom of funnel search. And what you have to do then is validate this out with complex at times like conversion lift studies, which the client often isn't interested in figuring out. They just want to take the quickest and the simplest solution. So that's again where people have been led down the garden path of this attribution and looking and not validating into the reporting there. It's I think it'll always be an issue in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get specific for a second. Tell me about how e-com businesses and B2C in general should be making use of Meta as a platform.
Again, e-com, the same as lead gen. It's the conversion lift studies and making sure that the incremental returns are there, that you're not just converting people who would have converted regardless, and having separate strategies to break those out. Last year in Q4 in particular, something that I was playing around with was new customer acquisition. Basically hooking up your CRM and feeding back into a custom event from your CRM back into the algorithm to say, this person's email doesn't exist in my CRM, therefore they're a new customer, and telling Meta to go and get more people like this. So you could split your whole strategy in 20% new or 80% returning or however you wanted to do that split. And we had great success with Black Friday rather than just with the Advantage Plus campaigns. Really good doing is getting those easy to get customers who are in market for what you want, probably already aware of you and probably will already buy. A lot of times they can become very focused on remarketing, but e-com, if they can find that incremental approach through whether it be new customer acquisition or through the new incremental bidding, which Meta has just released as well, they can see great success, and they're not just exhausting their budgets where customers would have come through anyway.
I was going to say on the creative level, one of the probably the best ad formats for e-commerce businesses to leverage are product catalogs. I think that really reduces so much like time that you're spending to purchase a product, because you're not wanting to go to like a different website to figure out, okay, what's the product catalog that I'm interested in. Meta has previously been able to kind of provide personalized recommendations of a product catalog based on your purchase history too. And I really haven't seen other social platforms leverage it to the capability that Meta has. So I think for e-commerce, if you're not running a product catalog ad, you really need to get on that. it might work for you, it might not, but I definitely feel like it's worth testing.
The advantage of going with that product catalog is you don't have to have every single product listed. You can go and become dynamic and dynamically feed in what customers would be interested in. As we all know, machine learning is better at any marketer than targeting. So that product catalog, be able to feed in dynamically what customers want, rather than you having to have hundreds of different ads for each product and throwing it up against the wall and just seeing what sticks. It eliminates a lot of that need.
I feel like that's a lot of what we do as marketers too, right? Professionally throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks.
What's that quote? Marketing is 50% you know what's going on and 50% you don't know what's going on, but it's hard to tell which is which. So
100%.
And even in the days of attribution, it's the same.
Well, AI is the same, but faster, I imagine, right? Like it's making educated guesses, but it is still like, based on this, we think X. So what would you say about B2B clients then, or B2B companies? How should they be making use of Meta if it's different?
I would say with B2B, you probably have a little bit more to test in terms of audience targeting. And when I'm talking through audience targeting, not so much talking about the parameters that Meta provides. It's more so in terms of the level of insight and data that you already have, and then plugging that into Meta to try and replicate audiences that resemble it. It can be applicable to both e-commerce and B2B industry, but because of the fact that with B2B, the creative experience is a little bit different, you should be focusing more on audience targeting capabilities. And then I would say on top of that is trying to figure out if there's anything within MMM modeling that you could leverage from Meta. Again, sort of going back to lift testing. What are the different models that you can apply there? I know that Meta is also working on a lot of different lift testing outside of its platforms. Something like search lift testing is something that Meta is starting to roll out to a couple of its beta clients. That could be something that B2B clients, look at testing a little bit more if they're kind of limited by this like creative roadblock, I guess.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that as well, I suppose I've had a tough year the last year with the lead gen side of things on Meta, with getting more expensive, getting easier to pull in leads. Like as we mentioned, if you tell Meta to go out and get you leads, it'll go out and attribute for top of funnel leads. These may just be people who sign up for absolutely everything, but don't convert down the funnel. And then when the client is backdating their own down funnel metrics, which we all know within a lead gen flow, they just believe that the platform doesn't work. So having really healthy and accurate first party data with like strong event matches in the back end that you can audit yourself will make that a little bit easier. Now, I haven't figured out this puzzle at times. A lot of my lead gen clients are more in favor of moving away from Meta within the last year. Just could be very subjective to my own situation as well. But It's trickier to get that quality because Meta will just think Advantage Plus campaign that we like reverse engineer to make work for lead gen situations, but it'll get 20 leads per week and I think it's doing an amazing job and the CPA is strong. These are 20 people who aren't interested in your field. So it's you have to be definitely more, I suppose, aware of your audiences, your first party data, your accuracy of the events that you're feeding it needs to be constantly measured and tested. And then the further down the funnel you can optimize for, you can optimize for like a purchase if that's if the lead gen / BCom, if you can go the whole way down the funnel and optimize and you've enough signal and events, that's just something you have to do.
I was actually going to add to that. Something that did come into mind while you were talking about this, Mark, was that the user journey for B2B is so different than e-commerce.
Yeah.
And you really do have the capability to leverage different kinds of conversion events. You don't even need to label them as conversion events, but different kinds of optimization based on that user journey. So I think with B2B, definitely the recommendation is to segment out a little bit more and to really figure out your user journey and kind of tailor it to that and segment that out in relation to your funnel. Do you want to be leveraging something like 2+ page view visits for something top of funnel, and then maybe like a demo request for something that's maybe a little bit more middle of funnel, and then that bottom of funnel looking a little bit differently? I think because B2B has such a different user journey, you do have that capability to not only measure different conversion points, but also optimize towards them.
Yeah, it's funny. The title of like the hypothesis today is if Meta ads don't work for you, it's your fault. But I think that's the least applicable on the B2B side, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't exactly think like Facebook or Instagram when I think about buying a $100,000 software platform or whatever.
100%.
But I could see why it would be great, like brand awareness, top of funnel play.
Yeah, I would say the pressure is probably more on B2B clients to also validate Meta and like really sorry to sound like kind of like a repetitive person, but really like the way to validate that consistently is testing. Run a geo lift test, run a conversion lift test, run a power lift study, try and like validate that and really get another idea of how Meta does contribute to your bottom line.
What is interesting and funny, I know that you, Santana, you mentioned that the title being if Meta doesn't work, it's your fault. And that's a pressure sometimes we get fed back from clients who have friends or colleagues in the industry and lead gen is working for them, or Meta works really well for them, but it's not working for their own client specific needs. So it's an interesting conversation to have if you're not prepared to put in the work to get your events set up correctly, get your data checked, and then to validate as we keep going on about with some sort of a lift study. You're just going to have a tough time. Like Meta can work, but you need to be specific in how you do it, particularly in the B2B space. It's a little bit trickier.
I think too, you have to have a big enough budget to get into the weeds to understand what's working for you, right? Like we talk pretty flippantly about testing on the show here, and that's great. But I think for, small, medium-sized businesses, like good testing doesn't always come easy, or, maybe even if it is affordable, maybe you're not a huge team, right? So I think like, I do think on a system, and maybe I'm wrong, but on a system as complex as Meta, I think there's a lot of like traps you can fall into if you're not a really sophisticated marketer in some ways.
That makes it very difficult for small businesses as well, because they have a smaller budget that they're playing with.
Yeah.
What we've seen historically, really year over year, is like the CPMs on Meta, regardless of what industry you're in and what your product or service is, have just been getting higher and higher. So I completely understand why small to middle or medium businesses are a little bit more hesitant to like increase their investment if it's harder to prove out.
Death, taxes, and rising CPMs.
That's the new title of the episode for sure. New line of merch for this season. So then let's talk a bit about the like robot-sized elephant in the room, which is automation. I know we've already sort of like chatted about it a bit, but I would love to hear what you think is worth exploring right now and what marketers maybe should give a minute or two. Obviously, these are progressing so fast that by the time the episode comes out, this might be totally different. But as we're recording right now in the end of September 2024, what do you think's working?
Yeah, it's been interesting because in a lot of ways, what was working last year has been reverted. So maybe what's working next year, and things have come full circle. Like we were very heavily focused on broad last year coming into Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Broad-based audiences through Advantage Plus campaigns where we were letting the algorithm ultimately decide our targeting and handing off the keys. And obviously that was a huge conversation within the industry. And everyone in every sector should obviously be trying some version of an Advantage Plus product. And they are, whether they realize it or not, whether that be machine learning or optimized targeting, for example. But we were very heavily focused on that, and it was working very successfully for clients. However, Meta had issues this year, which they didn't address until the summer. We were at the San Fran conference, and they had issues with their API, where the broad audiences weren't as strong as previously. And basically, Meta reps had been gaslighting some of our teams into thinking that it was their fault and that you're not getting out a learning, etc. When the reality of the situation was they had a breakage in their API. So internally, we've been testing moving back towards interest-based audiences as well, which is the old historical way certain clients are. And this is a test that's going to be ongoing into the future, as well as Advantage Plus campaigns, but not just relying on automation and Advantage Plus campaigns, but also trying other campaign types. Maybe you want to just do something for reach, or you want to make sure you have a strong share of voice or something a little bit more up the funnel. It's not having an over-reliance on AI. Again, just using AI to support what you do, but not to be your overall strategy, because when things break, they go really bad if you're just focused on that one option where you don't really know what's going on inside.
So you're saying that a Meta rep wrote the title for today's hypothesis.
Gaslighting with Meta.
Meta is viewing automation now as like AI, which I don't know if there is like a difference between the two at this point. My take on like what marketers can do to leverage the AI capabilities that Meta has would be more again on like the targeting level. From what I've seen on the creative level, it's just not always aligned with the company's branding guidelines. There's not a whole lot of control, which is really scary for clients that invest so heavily into their creative services or like are deploying someone else to kind of come up with their creative. You don't want to have someone just go in there and completely change everything without any hypothesis testing or thematic testing or anything like that. But with audience targeting, what I have noticed is that they are very focused on kind of taking data of what's worked really, really well for some of your campaigns and kind of replicating that. So like replicating users that kind of resemble that behavior. And really, if you can, as a client, ensure that your tracking and the level of reporting you're providing to Meta is at a good level, you probably will get a little bit more of accuracy about user targeting as well.
Is it kind of like how Maddie's always, I don't want to say harping, that's the wrong word. Maddie's always reinforcing that it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like what signals you give the
100%.
platform.
Best way to put it.
Yeah.
And we're finding with some clients is that it's a little bit more complex to get something like Conversions API running, but also consistently working. Like, yes, get Conversions API installed, but are you going in frequently and measuring what your EMQ score looks like? Are those like events matching up accurately? Because if there is a drop off there, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice.
Then that's something we always considered we were very, very strong at it as an agency. We've been auditing a lot of internal accounts, and that EMQ score that AK was discussing is your event match quality. So ultimately, things get set up. Our data team is incredible, get everything set up and running. But ultimately, if the clients aren't able to, and just sometimes they don't have the resources, but able to update events or things change on landing pages and not filling those in, or again, updating those customer lists, that event match quality drops. And you've kind of done all this incredible work to get to where you are, but then you're putting garbage in and you're getting garbage out. And you don't realize why. You think it's, oh, Meta doesn't work or Advantage Plus isn't working for me, when in reality, you need to really audit what you're telling the algorithm to do, because it's just so strong at figuring that out for you. So garbage in, garbage out.
Is that hard to measure? Because I know that like in the past, Meta's been pretty like locked down with their API and it's hard to get your own third-party tools in there. So have you experienced any difficulties like validating the data outside of the platforms?
It would be very difficult, I think, to validate something like an event match quality outside of the platform. I do feel like there's like a feature on the ads platform called like Events Manager that gives you a really good idea of what that score is out of 10. And the Meta best practice is like if anything is below 7 or 8, I believe it's worth kind of revisiting with your developers and trying to figure out where that discrepancy is. In my experience, I haven't seen that, that score is falsified in any way or has like a big gap between what clients are seeing on their back end.
And that actually leads me to one of my kind of final questions here, which is how do you make these third-party platforms integrate well with your aggregate data reporting? Like, how do you make all of your information play nicely together when traditionally those platforms like to be locked down in their own siloed approaches?
Yeah, I think I might have partially answered this before, so I'll kind of just like repeat that. And Mark, if you have anything different, please feel to add to it.
Yep.
In my experience, I think going back to lift testing is probably the best way to kind of consistently validate it or to try and get some sort of alignment. The thing that is probably the most challenging and very frustrating for clients is that their internal level of reporting with the value that Meta is bringing back to them is never going to fully align with what is being reported on Meta. And that's sort of where we need to validate and test that further. We definitely know that Meta does have a habit of kind of overinflating their results, kind of through conversions, as Mark mentioned earlier. However, Meta sometimes can have an impact on other channels. So the best way to really validate and revisit that would be through running geo lift studies, MMM like lift studies as well, through either power lift or just your regular conversion lift study, and trying to factor in the results of that to the multipliers that maybe you're playing around with on your end if you have MMM reporting. And then I would say another thing is to just try to keep your eye out for the different level of testing capabilities that Meta is rolling out, with search lift being one of them, and try and see what that bottom line looks like. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where Meta will fully be aligned and truthful about like the bottom line, because I just think they don't have that level of, tracking and reporting capability. But I think the best way to kind of do that is to consistently revisit your testing capabilities.
And the platform is starting to finally, I suppose, listen to the industry, and they're aware that we don't 100% trust the platform-based data. Obviously, attribution on Meta and on Google is different, so they're always going to spit you out two very different ideals. But a very, very exciting update that really is going to change the game is they're now hooking up third parties into Meta. So you can directly hook up Google Analytics, North, Beam, Adobe at the moment. and you can bring in these custom events from the third parties, and in time you're going to be able to optimize towards these events. So like if say a client more relies on a third party system like Northbeam or Adobe to hook up to their CRM, you'll be able to pipe in those exact custom events, particularly for like a lead gen. It can be very important, rather than relying on the custom events you create within Meta, which uses its own like attribution and measuring, I suppose, software to rank it, which is always going to be a little bit different to your own. So this is really, really going to change, because in the name, I suppose, or in the game of AI at the moment, where we're getting less and less control, Meta is moving back towards, okay, let's work with AI, but give the marketers, I suppose, more control and ability to optimize and target as they go. So they've had a lot of announcements in the last couple of years, Meta, but I think this is one of the most exciting, and it's really, really going to change how we all advertise on the platform in time. So yeah, exciting times.
I don't even know how they could be accurate, and not to single out Meta here, because I think this is true of any advertising platform. Like, how can you be accurate when you don't have access to the CRM or to the like sales platform to see like the transaction? Like, I just don't think there's a world in which any of the platforms could give you an accurate number without access to other of your there's no one single source of truth.
And that's why the platforms assume it's doing such a good job. When you feed it in half-baked information, it'll spend all your budget, it'll spend your CPA, and it'll assume it's out of learning. But because you haven't hooked up your CRM and fed back in those custom events, whether that be Klaviyo or another third party, you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And I know honestly probably the theme of this podcast today has been garbage in, garbage out, but it ultimately comes back to what you feed it. And that's why I think I'm super happy with the way it's moving. I was a little bit nervous last Q4 when we had such a reliance on Advantage Plus and how well it was working, and we were all validating it internally in Q2 and Q3, and then in Q4 executing. And I was like, is this the way the industry is moving? We just control a little bit of targeting, we just control a little bit of creative, and then we just rely on the platform to tell us what works. But now being able to bid for incremental conversion, to be able to hook up third-party integrations and conversion value rules, we're starting to get more back into the weeds of things and into the technical while working alongside rather than against the platform.
I guess too, like going back to creative for a second, it's interesting because I could see why AI would be great for bottom of funnel creative ads, right? Where it just replicates what it knows works for like conversion paths to sale. But like those middle and top of funnel where you're like trying to build brand awareness or you're doing anything other than selling a thing, I wonder like how AI works there or how it doesn't, right? Like I think there's still a need for a heavy creative presence from your team.
Yeah.
Have you seen good like creative AI integration in the top of funnel, like mid funnel?
No, because the way that Meta is approaching AI is kind of give us everything, allow us to work with everything, and then we'll kind of give you something back. You definitely can control certain elements, but it's so hard to measure what's actually working well. So unless you set up some sort of A/B test where you're allowing one feature of like the AI testing to be enabled and the other cell being one that like has none of them enabled, then only you can like measure the impact of it. But again, clients are very hesitant to kind of go down that route because some of them have like very strict brand guidelines. And
exactly, yeah.
I think you also have so many clients that just have their CEOs and VPs like waiting for an ad to be featured. And if they're not happy with it, that's like the first piece of feedback that comes back to agencies, like to take that down. So yeah, I would recommend it, but I think it needs to be like really well thought out.
I got buy-in for optimized creative last year, which was an option, and Meta still provided, and we're doing a lot more testing this year because we've seen more success. But I got buy-in early last year for a test because the client had such a limited library of creative, so it seemed like an amazing idea where we feed in the platform a couple of creative and it spits out 10 or 12 variations. But as Akshita mentioned, we had very little control over what it changed. So ultimately it ended up changing the brand look and feel. And then it's a CEO who wasn't aware of this A/B test who's ringing up Thrive directly, and we're kind of getting ourselves in trouble. So it was more difficult last year. I know a lot of Thrivers internally are testing it into Q4. Meta's summit in June and July, they were promising that the optimizations have gotten a lot better, that the creative is a lot more accurate, and you have the ability to control more. I just haven't seen it yet. I know any client that is very concerned with brand probably won't buy in for now, but again, in 2 or 3 years, with the speed that this is advancing, this is definitely something we'll all be using. We'll all be switching on optimize creative and letting it spit out 20 or 30 variations for us. And we'll be able to control the elements that we say, okay, do not touch or do move. So yeah, it's going to be a changing world as well for creative in the next couple of years.
I didn't even think of that. Like, I imagined you would feed it an ad and it would be like, yeah, we'll change the background, we'll change like product dimensions, whatever. And then it goes in and changes the brand. It's like I go in and give it a photo of mine and I'm like, give me a new outfit. And it just like gives me a new nose and it tells me I'm ugly.
And that was the issue, because we had very consistent with the test that I ran it in. We had very consistent brand colors and very consistent overlays and logos, and it changed the color of the logo and the background. So it was just a dangerous game to play.
It's interesting too, because you almost wonder like why it doesn't have a script similar to like ChatGPT, right? Like in ChatGPT, you could be like, use this tone of voice, use this, like it almost would be better with prompts, but I'm not on the Meta R&D team.
Do you know what though? I think that's what people were envisioning when they initially rolled this out. They were very much envisioning like maybe not having full control over what exactly they can modify, but using what's converted well or performed well previously to inform that. And I think, it's just not there right now. I think we need to give Meta maybe like a couple more months for it to get there.
Well, hopefully we'll just send this episode directly to them, right to the feedback line.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, was there anything else that you think our audience might be interested in on the Meta front?
The only thing I would mention is we work closely with the Meta agency team, and something they've been pushing for quite recently is the Performance 5 scorecard, which basically is a playbook or a best practice handbook of how to leverage and work with Meta in, I suppose, 2024. But something that I found interesting, and it's always the underlying theme in marketing, is you have to test the hypothesis for yourself, because a lot of what they're suggesting is very, very accurate, but a lot of what they're suggesting isn't, like an over-reliance on automation for one, an over-reliance on consolidation when sometimes that doesn't work. So everyone should just be testing out features and themes themselves, and each account needs its own individual outlook. Each client needs their own individual outlook. Everyone has their own, I suppose, customers and customer behavior. So always be testing. I can't believe I said it, but always be testing.
Yep, always be testing.
Always be testing. All right. Well, thank you for all the wonderful one-liners and for this great meta conversation. This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks.